chemical that affects cell B sitting right next to it, right? That is information flow. The other kind of information flow that is important is the flow of information from storage of genetic information, for example, right? Genes and DNA, to ultimately producing a product like a protein that can do something for the body. And that ability to have that genetic information flow is vital as well. And if there are errors along the way, anywhere in this information flow, the result is going to be different or none at all. Right? So it's important that we have that. But these are necessary here in order to do these two right here, energetics and homeostasis. And the other thing that you should be aware of, and I don't know what level of biology you have had, how much you have had, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about evolution and anatomy and physiology, but the anatomies and physiologies have been shaped by millions of years, if not billions of years of evolution. Some of these cellular processes that we're going to be talking about, like glycolysis, has been around for 3.5 billion years. And it has been around, as best we can tell, relatively unchanged over that period of time, right? So there are some very, evolutionary trends that we see in this. The other thing you need to keep in mind about physiology of human is that we are the only true bipedal organism. A lot of our anatomy is leftover, if you will, from our quadruped ancestors, and sometimes it gets in the way of our ability to do our job because we're like this. So sometimes we are constrained with what we can do physiologically based on our evolutionary path. Okay. And I'll try to point out cases where that matters. Sometimes it doesn't matter. But that's what we mean there by that. So we're going to focus mostly on bioenergetics in the context of allowing the body to maintain homeostasis. That's kind of our big picture things there. Okay. So we talked about some of this in anatomy. This structure-function relationship, you have that at any level of organization from molecular interactions. A classic example, right? Enzymes, the purpose of enzymes in the body inside cells are to speed up chemical reactions. They don't alter the chemical reaction, they just get you to equilibrium faster. They cannot do that unless they can recognize and bind to the reactants in the chemistry. So that is a complementarity of structure and function. These things have to be able to bind to each other to catalyze a reaction. I'm going to spend a good bit of time talking about that on Friday. So it's all the way down at this low level here, but we also see it at levels of tissues and cells, this kind of what we call compartmentation, where we specialize different parts of the body to do different jobs. You certainly can see this in cells. Organelles allow cells to compartmentalize and specialize in one way or another. So do tissues. So these levels of structures will give us these different kinds of functions and allow certain things to specialize depending upon what you're studying at a given point in time. The other thing I think you should realize about physiology in the big picture is that if you really stop and think rather than just trying to memorize something, it really should be logical. You may not understand all the mechanics of every little thing, but the big picture should be logical. It should make sense. Your body should never do anything that seems counterproductive or counterintuitive. You should never have process A and process B happening at the same time if they're antagonistic, meaning they cancel each other out, right? So really try to take a step back and think about the big picture of what's happening whenever we're talking about physiology. And you'll hear me say, I'll say this all the time, is that it should make sense. It should be logical. There should be a pathway to an end, and you shouldn't send yourself down some pathway that would be counterintuitive. I mean, it should make sense. Energy is something that should also make sense from the standpoint of why we need it. I mean, we don't have the ability to transform energy from sunlight into sugar to make ATP, right, like photosynthesis and plants do. So we have to obtain complex organic compounds from our environment. We break them down. Hopefully you're aware that any time you break down a compound, you are breaking chemical bonds, and it is in chemical bonds where energy is stored. We'll have a larger discussion about this later, but the breakdown of things releases energy. What would you call those in chemistry speak? What do you call kind of reactions that release energy? Catabolic and exothermic. I heard both of them, and those are both entirely correct. So catabolic means to break down, okay? And that type of reactions that are catabolic are exothermic. I don't particularly like that word because that literally implies a release of heat, which is true. I like a larger context word. I would prefer exergonic. Gonos in Latin refers to energy, right? So exer to release. So an exergonic reaction releases energy. Oh, it is exothermic, by the way, right? Because it releases heat also. But I like this word instead. And that's catabolic whenever we break things down. The opposite of a catabolic reaction is what? Anabolic, right?
Endothermic.
Yeah, and those would be endothermic, which means you would have to add heat. Not entirely true, but you have to add energy. So I'll call them endergonic. I like that word better there for that. So we're always breaking down compounds to release energy, and then we're using the energy that gets released to do, in this context here, chemical work, and that is build other compounds. So you break a chemical bond, you release energy, you form a chemical bond, you consume energy. So we need to get this energy from food. So carbohydrates, fats, others could use protein. The preferred substrate is usually carbohydrate. If your body is out of carbohydrate, it will then use lipids. And if your body is really low in lipids, it will then use protein. And the thing about protein for energy, while protein has as much energy in it per gram as carbohydrate, your body doesn't use proteins to store energy. So that means that if you are breaking down a protein, you're breaking down something that had a job in your body, right? And so it's going to be at a cost of a loss of function for whatever that was you broke down. So you're only going to see people do protein catabolism when they're very malnourished. Otherwise, we always prefer carbohydrates and fats. Right, Dr. Borman?
I wish I could sit down and listen to